We often think about small family norms as an elite phenomenon.
Mhm.
That, oh, low family, like this is elites telling people not to have kids. But one of the salient facts of demographic change in the last 40 years is that fertility rates have not declined very much for highly educated people. Almost all of the decline in fertility in America is among less educated people, lower
Huh,
social, lower
interesting.
socioeconomic status people. So what's actually happened is today in America, fertility rates rise with income. That's not quite true. Depending on how you measure it, they're either flat or rise with
Mhm.
income and social status. Depends on the exact measure you use. There's different ways to measure this, but there's no negative gradient of fertility with social status in the US. So, and this is because most of the decline has been among lower income people. So I think when we realize that, we really need to understand what's going on here, is not so much that elites adopted a small family norm. It's the elites promoted a small family norm that they did not themselves adopt.
Mhm. And does the same go for marriage
uh,
too? Does the same go for marriage
yes,
rates?
the same goes for marriage. That elites tend to marry more socioeconomic, more people with a higher socioeconomic status tend to marry at the same time that they talk about how marriage should be optional. We shouldn't create these, we shouldn't be stigmatizing non-marriage, all these different things. They say, oh yeah, we need to have family diversity and allow these
Mhm.
things. And by the way, we're going to continue to conventionally marry and have kids like a 1950s couple.
Yeah.
Like,
Very interesting. That is an
so
interesting
there's
demographic
kind
shift.
of a like a liberalism for thee but not
Yeah.
for me kind of thing going on with high socioeconomic status Americans.
So given that history, that's actually an interesting point that I wasn't aware of until quite recently. I've actually learned about this in the last couple of months in preparation for my own book. My book Truths is coming out in September, and one of the chapters is on the nuclear family structure. And that was actually where it surprised me, is the rules for thee, not for me. But against the backdrop you just laid out, it's actually historically unsurprising, right? You could tell a completely different narrative around the same set of facts, which is that the elite, and I usually don't like the use of that word, but for the purpose of this conversation, let's just go ahead
Sure.
and use
High
the word for
status people,
economically
whatever. Yeah,
well-off
yeah, yeah.
people who are, well regarded in an institutional life or whatever, at the top of an institutional hierarchy. For the purpose of this discussion, let's use that as that working definition of a word I usually don't like, the elite. But nonetheless, let's suppose that actually you see consistency throughout history, where what you saw initially was what you described as sterilization policy, to say that there are certain populations that we proactively went out of our way to have sterilization laws for that lasted far more than most people even recognize, according to you, through the 1960s in certain states, in states that required mandated sterilization for certain populations that we just didn't want to see populate themselves more broadly. That became a softly enforced norm through abortion policy, keeping in mind that even Planned Parenthood and the Margaret Sangers of the world had a mostly eugenic vision.
Yeah, they weren't always soft about
Oh, no, no, no,
it.
they weren't soft
It's
at
not
all,
subtle.
right?
Yeah,
It just
yeah,
got softened
yeah.
in its presentation. But the Margaret Sangers of the world, I mean,
Right.
this
Yeah.
abortion began as a eugenic project in the United States of America, as
Mhm.
promoted certainly by the Margaret Sangers or Planned Parenthood. So you see forced sterilization laws, then you see abortion in the original version of its promotion through the softer effects, even though its proponents would no longer claim
Mhm.
that as an objective. And then as a natural extension to that, you just see another soft progeny, descendant of that same ideology, which is to say, preach fewer children to those amongst the plebeian masses who will
Yep.
listen, while not actually behaving that way amongst the so-called enlightened elite. So, in a certain sense, there's a, I mean, it's not comfortable to observe, but there's a historic coherence.
There is a through line, and I'll say that first of all, I think it's worth noting that norms are a way more powerful technology than
Of course,
sterilization
they
or
are.
abortion. The research on demographic history suggests that the main factor driving changes in fertility rates is not this or that technology. It's social norms about what's acceptable, reasonable, desirable, and prestigious. And so, like norms as a tech, if we think of norms as a technology, they are way more powerful than these other technologies. They're achieving the end these other technologies couldn't.